Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. I'm your host, Scott Thomas Outler, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in live this evening. It is Saturday, July the 13th, 2019. I hope that everyone's weekend is off to a great start so far. Looking forward to tonight's episode. Coming up in the next segment, I'll be joined by tonight's guest, Wayne D. Evans. I met Wayne earlier this year at an event he was presenting at outside of Atlanta called A Novel Idea, and he spoke that night about his books and the many adventures he has had in his life. So we're going to be delving more deeply into those subjects coming up shortly, so do stay tuned. Here at the top of the episode, I did want to encourage listeners to please follow the channel here at 17 Numa Radio. It's quick and free and easy. Just click on the follow button found above the slideshow here on the page where the episode is streaming, and that will get you set up to receive notifications for all the future episodes and guests that are lined up in the months ahead. There's also an archive available on the channel for all past episodes. And if anyone is interested in appearing as a guest on a future episode, you can reach out to me via email at 17numa@gmail.com. or connect with me and send a message on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Be more than happy to take a look at your work and get you set up for a future episode. Always interested in talking to fellow writers, other artists, musicians, or really anyone in the world who is inspired and passionate about whatever type of work they are doing. That's what this show is all about. Do also want to encourage you to check out my website at 17numa.com, where there are links to all of my poetry, essays, interviews, fiction, reviews, live events, and books, including my most recent collection of Sand and Sugar, which was released back in April through Cyberwit Press. So that's about it here at the top of the episode. Gonna go to a short music break, play a piece by Hans Zimmer, and then we will be back on the other side with tonight's guest, Wayne D. Evans. Stay tuned. right, welcome back to Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. And without further ado, going to introduce today's guest. No, he is not the most interesting man in the world from TV commercials, and not an aging Indiana Jones from action-adventure books and movies, but he is very close. Arctic explorer, secret agent, decorated soldier, academic scholar, honored inventor, recognized artist, unique musician, respected teacher, successful gambler, accomplished entrepreneur, surviving pilot, perpetual dreamer, proven lover, prolific writer. Now in his 80s, he is a published author of 6 books and 6 more being born, a true Renaissance man with 80 years of reinventing himself and cheating death, so is now known as the man with more lives than a cat, who has proved it's never too late to make your dreams come true. W.D. Evans. So thanks for joining the show tonight, Wayne. How are you doing?
Well, fine, Scott. I appreciate very much you having me. I know we've met a couple of times, and you said, well, something about July 13th. I said, well, it will work out just fine. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to have you on. Remember hearing you speak earlier this year at a novel idea hosted by Beth Hermes, who's a past guest on the episode. So definitely wanted to hear more about your life and the books that you've written, and I guess maybe a good place to dive in. I know we've got a lot to talk about tonight, but maybe where were you born and some of the early adventures in your life and how you ended up here in Georgia?
Well, it's, 80 years. I can still remember most of it. Like the joke goes, I can't remember when I was born. I was pretty young. But anyway, I was born in the middle of the Depression, and my father was trying to find work, and he couldn't, so he kind of left the family, and I never saw him again. So this set up my whole idea of being very independent, sometimes too much so, and a dreamer. And so I've always had a lot of opportunities to dream. We didn't have much food, or we didn't have much toys or anything. So anyway, I had plenty of that, and I have to thank a lot of my career, particularly in terms of writing, to my grade school teacher. She convinced me to enter a contest in writing, and I did, and I won. And if you can imagine, the title was Free Enterprise for Peace and Prosperity. I was only 12 years old, so what did I know about that kind of a subject? But I said to her, she says, you need to write. You have a knack for writing. And I said, well, what do I write about? And she said, well, why don't you write about your life and your adventures? And I said, I haven't had hardly any adventures yet. So she told me, which I'll never forget, well, go live your life, live adventures, and then in your older age and everything, write books about it. And that's exactly what I did. So I left my writing career when I was 12, and I guess you could say that was my first literary award, and I just put it on the shelf to do all these crazy things you know about, Scott, and then I just decided it's about time to start writing, and that was my wife's suggestion after I'd crashed my airplane 4 times, and last time in a tree, and she says, why don't you stay on the ground and write about those silly books? So that's how it all came about.
When did you make that turning point and decide to get serious about the writing?
I was in my 70s. So back to the whole premise of most of my talks is it's never too late to make your dreams come true. So I've had a lot of dreams, and many, many, many have come true, and always wanted to be a pilot, but I started out afraid of heights. And so that didn't make a lot of sense, but I broke that and became a pilot, and my wife helped me build an airplane, would you believe, in our garage. She went up with me a few times in spite of my oopses, and so to answer your question, I was pretty well in my late 70s when I decided to really break into it and become a pilot.
With the flying and being a pilot, is that something that came out of your time in the military or just a private passion that you had?
Pretty much a private passenger, but I did have one event that I was coming back from boot camp, Fort Benning, Georgia, and I was flying back, and I had never flown before. Didn't have much in the family, as I told you, so we didn't fly around much. So, and I happened to fly back as dusk was coming down, and it was still a 4-engine plane at the time, no jets yet. This was 1957, 58, or 59 or so, and so I said, well, okay, I'm going to sit by the window. So when the light comes back up a number of hours later, I would be able to see down and see Chicago, where we were coming from, basically. And so I'm watching out the window, and I expected to just go off into the darkness as I looked towards the end of the wing, but instead I saw a bunch of glowing engine and eventually fire coming out, and so I was not very happy with that, and I kind of hollered or waved to the stewardess, and I kind of pointed out that maybe our engines were on fire, and she kind of smiled, and she says, that's normal, coffee, tea, or milk. So, and I said, oh, okay, so now I know enough about flying that I won't probably do that in a few years. So that was my first indoctrination to flying, is watching the airplane's engines burn, which they weren't really. It was just exhaust.
And I glossed over something that you mentioned earlier, talking about crashing into a tree. Can you delve into that a little bit more? How did you get out of that predicament?
We had flown out to a friend in West Georgia who had a small airport, and he was supposed to have some extra fuel for us to fly back from Georgia, and he neglected to get the fuel. So we were kind of low on fuel, and there was a wind and storm coming up in Alabama, and we saw that was the closest airport to get fuel. Well, anyway, the wind started to come up. It was a small, light plane, and it was tending to almost go backwards more than it was frontwards. So we inadvertently we ran out of fuel just as we were making the last turn. And off in the distance, you saw the runway. Down off to the left, we saw houses. Off to the right, you saw a lake. And the only thing below me was a forest. So I was forced to make a emergency landing on top of a tree in the forest, about 70 feet up. And finally they found us in about 3 hours, got us out, and so the plane had a little damage on the fabric. I was okay. My biggest problem was I was getting older, and you know how old men get when they're not too close to a bathroom. So anyway, that was I had no way to have any damage, but I had some problems there. So that's how we wound up the tree, and so the newspapers were out there, television was out there, and so I immediately got a phone and called my wife and told her don't be upset if she sees anything on the 6 o'clock news. So I got home and I said, how do I look? And she said, oh, you look pretty good. And I said, well, the plane doesn't. But anyway, that was my fourth episode. That was the last time that I went up. It was basically just running out of fuel. And that's the dread of the pilot, the small plane pilot, is when everything goes from a humming and a little roaring to silence. So I experienced that silence that I'll never forget. So anyway, we got there and we got down okay and back home. And so my wife said, what are you going to do now? And I said, stay on the ground for one thing. And the other thing, she said, well, what are you going to do then? And I said, well, I think it's about time to start writing books again. And that's what we did. So that's my story of how I got back into writing books.
You talked a bit about overcoming your fear to become a pilot. How has that played a role in aspects of your life, the entrepreneurial spirit that you seem to have of overcoming fears and pushing forward to go on these new adventures?
Well, I'll have to say that it was in my early 20s when, after getting out of the military and wanting to marry this young lady, we've been married 58 years now, we met at a dance, and we kind of got an attachment. But the military pay isn't very much, and so I got out of the service, and I wanted to get married and go back to school, have a family, the usual things, but I didn't have much of any money. And besides that, I had been teaching classified communication system for the government, and it was kind of, the joke is, when someone asked me while I was trying to get a job, what did you do the last few years? I couldn't tell them. And I would joke with them, says, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. You know that story. Well, anyway, there wasn't much luck there. But then, lo and behold, I get a letter from one of these 3-letter government agencies, and they said, you have your clearance, you have the knowledge, and we want you to come up to Alaska and probably the Arctic to help man our national defense system right on the Arctic Ocean. And the money was so fantastic compared to what we were used to that we just decided, well, there's another year and a half that we won't be able to get married, but it worked out extremely well. But I did encounter, potential battles with polar bears and caribou that was attacking the truck on my last day, and and a major storm that I was sort of freezing to death and radiated with the radiation poison from the transmitter tubes, with the detective doors have been blown open. And so when we finally got back, anything that my wife and I would encounter was probably not much of a fear compared to what we had gone through while up there. So it was that early 20s that taught me you can overcome that, and actually you can't get rid of fear, but you can turn it around and get it to work for you. And I guess the caribou in this dumb truck that had no muffler and everything was more afraid of me and the truck than I was afraid of it, and they finally turned around. So you start off life that way in your mid-20s, and so many other things later on is not a big deal.
Having your mettle tested at that early age sets the stage when things come. So I'm assuming that all these adventures you've been on find their way into the novels you're writing now. How much of the material that you write is fiction and how much is nonfiction?
I've been asked that a number of times. On the first true novel, after I wrote a short story on my flying mishaps called Is It a Bird or a Plane or a Red Chicken? And we came up with Searching for the Good War, which is a full 5-hour read or so. And as we were putting that together, it took 3 years. And one of the reasons was that she did not know a lot of the things that I had gone through up there. And as I was writing parts of it in the book, these are the things she says, I didn't know that. Well, I couldn't tell her so many things, not just the technical aspects, which I had security clearance and been threatened with prison if I divulged anything. But it was the fact that things are very scary, being attacked by animals and storms. And she was 3,000 miles away, and I wasn't going to shake her up. So it took 3 years to do that because we were divulging to ourselves. So when I first started out, I said, well, okay, maybe 60% is real and the rest 40%. Well, when it finally got done, it was almost 95% of everything in all of my books is pretty much right out of our lives together. So that's why we call it another true life adventure from W.D. Evans type thing. So I would say the vast majority of most of the books in content is pretty well right out of our true lives.
And when you're talking about your writing, you say we a lot, referring to your wife. And what type of impact has that had, that marriage, that 50-year marriage that you've had? How has that impacted your life? And I guess that's probably the core from where everything comes out of.
Yes, we had many things that we did. We had after a couple of large Fortune 100 companies that throughout the 60s or so, I was very much involved with technology, and there were layoffs and whatever. And finally, I decided that we were going to do our own thing. So we started our own businesses in communications, wireless, in fact, wireless communications, which I'd always been fascinated with ever since my uncle, when I was extremely young, would fix our old radio by banging on the side. And it had a cord that went down into the wall, and it always fascinated me as how that Lone Ranger came through that cord. Well, that started my career trying to understand what eventually would be called radio or wireless. So in any case, that started our roller coaster ride of being an independent person and starting and failing and bankruptcies and getting caught up in Gulf Wars and 9/11 disasters, which turned off some potential investors. And anyway, we made some good progress. We had a small company. We put on some communications tracking systems or elderly in Naples, Florida, which worked well. And eventually I got hooked on GPS, and that's how I came out to be in my 60s, I patented 3 GPS improvements and wound up getting about 85 car companies paying me money for the use of it. So it was all of these situations where you started a business and they'd fold, or there'd be a war or something. So the early days of being really threatened many times with life, we got to those, and when something didn't work well, we'd say, well, what are we going to do? And the answer was start all over again.
That entrepreneurial spirit of continuing forward when some things have to fold under, how do you stay focused when in those down times, and what advice do you have to other people that have that entrepreneurial spirit or that Renaissance spirit, as you describe yourself, to be able to continue forging ahead through obstacles? When we wrote the Good War book, for short, we coined the phrase unconditional love, because there were so many points in there, times in there, that she would just keep me going. And that continued on all of our marriage life. And so I would say, if you can find someone that's literally your soul partner and is willing to accept the fact that you're crazy sometimes, and that she just sort of rolls the punch and believes that a small check from an insurance company will come in the mail when you don't have anything. And so we had a mutual belief that we could make things happen if we believed they would, and we worked hard enough. So having a partner that is 1,000% with you is, I think, the key. Good advice, absolutely. And so let's move on a little bit and focus on the technical aspect of your writing. How do you find time, and do you have any sort of routines that you adhere to, favorite times of the day to write, places that you prefer to write in?
I should, but I don't. And sometimes what it is I'll be sitting down and I'll see something. We don't watch all of the stuff on television now, but occasionally a program. And thanks to my son-in-law, we're on Netflix, so we pick up a few things. And my wife loves news. Anyway, I'll see something, and it will trigger a memory. And I'll just jot down a few things. And then when the bug hits me, I say, gee, I'll come up with something. So then now, besides the 6 published books and 6 to come, and you have the flyer that I provided you, I have at least 5 or 6 more where I finished the potential cover and the first line or two and the what's called the elevator pitch. And they range all over the place, but they're all based upon true life adventures. So no, I at times don't want to think about it, and at other times I can't stop. So it's all a question of what the brain does And when I feel pretty good, I'll just come in the office and I'll start making a number of notes. And other times I might go a number of days, a week or more, and nothing. I'll just let it gel. And so, no, there's no rhyme or reason. I go as my brain tells me to go.
Okay, just chasing that inspiration when it's there.
Yeah.
When you're writing a book, are you working on multiple books at the same time, or do you hone in and focus on one particular collection?
I have rather a chaotic mind, and so I write multiple books at the same time. And I'll get to the point where I'll say, okay, I've done enough. I have the plan, I plot, I know what's going to happen. Pretty good idea of how it's going to end, who's the heroes, who's the antagonist. And so all I have to do is make one page of it, and I would have locked in the storyline. And then at that point in time, I say, that's enough for now. I've got so many other ones I want to tackle. So I do not complete it all the way through. That's one reason that the first true novel took 3 years, besides the emotional situation there, because I had 3 or 4 other things I wanted to write at the time. So I put it down, and we then come back and later on. And I would learn more about some of the little better procedures to structure some of the books. So I worked on multiple books at basically the same time.
Okay. And is there any one currently that you're most focused on?
Yeah, one my wife doesn't really care for. It's called The Candyman. And it's basically a story of a young computer programmer. And he is allowed to share space with this former CIA agent. And he's actually out of the agents out of the Second World War. And he was a part of the OSS. And this is a number of years ago. And I was looking for a space to work to develop my senior living locating and tracking systems. And so he let me use one of his offices. And the story goes that I overheard a conversation between him and some people that I didn't understand the language. I have a hard enough time with English, let alone other languages. But I have a suspicion it had a Mexican accent to it. And this was at a time where there was quite a Noriega, and there was a lot of that type of thing going on. So my imagination let me go wild, and I thought that he was in cahoots with the drug lords and stuff. And after they left, he came to me and he said, I've got an opportunity that will not only allow you to afford what you're working on, but you'll get a check that's more zeros than you can ever imagine. Well, anyway, that kind of turned me off. I won't tell you any more of the story, but I passed it up, and that told a little bit about the character that I thought I was at the time. And that's not at all what I thought it was. So anyway, that's what I'm working on, and it's the fact of anybody, a drug lord or whatever, doping children's candy with the dope and everything to try to create the next generation of drug addicts.
The books that you've published so far, are there a couple of them that stand out above the rest? And what are the experiences like when you're going back through and recounting all these adventures you've been on?
There's 2. One is which I called the Bulls, Broads, and Bullets. And it was one day where some of my fellow people, engineers, we were doing a dog and pony show with one of my invention systems in San Antonio, and it was a weekend coming up, and so we decided to take a trip to Mexico. I'd never been there, and we got caught up in all sorts of things, and we were accosted by a gang of teenage prostitutes, and we also made a wrong turn and wound up in the wrong place, and we were next thing you know, we were staring down the barrel of of mercenaries and machine guns protecting what we believe to be a drug lord's stash, and that all happened within one day. That was one of which we wrote up and called the Bulls, Broads, and Bullets. The other one, which is very timely, it's on the 20th. I'll be giving a talk in the Alpharetta Library, and that happens to be also the exact date, July 20th, 50 years ago, of Neil Armstrong setting the ship down on the moon. And I had written a book earlier, maybe a year ago, and it was called The Spy That Never Was. And it was the fact that over my career I've been involved with such sophisticated and secret technology that I've been accused of being a spy 3 times. So this was a book about a young man that basically is fallen in love with this radio communications technology, and he finds himself both in the military and later on as a civilian being accused of espionage. And anyway, it turns out that he and his partner find that a circuit or chip, integrated circuit, that he's been working with from a company, Texas Instruments, has a flaw in it. Well, anyway, he contacts the company. Next thing you know, he's hauled into a conference room with his partner, and the FBI and the CIA and everybody's there, and he's being accused again. And he happens to find the problem that's in this one chip, and that one chip is supposed to be, as we found out, used in the lunar landing module memory system, which we all know didn't fail. It's just that it got overloaded. But Neil Armstrong, being the expert pilot he was, he set it down manually, which I think is fantastic. So before too much was all brought out about the 50th anniversary, we wrote this book, which had a good part of how my partner and I had discovered something we'd like to think, having then fixed it with the help of Texas Instruments, may have been helpful in helping the lunar landing work well, and also then bring back our astronauts. So that's the theme of the book, but the premise for it is actual as a design engineer. So you never know. Civilians sometimes find something that the big guns don't.
Absolutely. That's the case a lot of times in journalism as well. When you talk about things like staring down the barrel of a gun there in Mexico or crashing your airplane, and you talk about yourself as the man with more lives than a cat, do you feel sometimes that maybe there was a guardian angel or some sort of spirit watching over your life to take you through all these experiences?
Well, the answer is yes. And someone says, have you found your reason? The old cliche, look for the reason in your life. And the answer is no. The closest I can come is, since I talk about it's never too late to make your dreams come true, because we've had plenty of them, and through ups and downs, we've made a good number come true. So what I tell people is the reason I'm there is I want to instill in them, through my own examples of various events, that it's never too late, that you can look at a dream and you can, in turn, if you work at it, you can make that dream come true or pretty close. And if not, if you got enough dreams, then you say, well, it didn't quite work out, we'll move on to the next one. In other words, a bucket list of dreams, okay? So that's the reason for the ongoing theme of all my books and my talks, is it's never too late to make your dreams come true, because we've been very fortunate with most of ours. But we're still looking for the reason that we're still around. And maybe it's to have talks and talk with you and other people to instill some inspiration that they too can move forward even when things are not running too good.
Well, that is a great piece of advice and great piece of wisdom to instill in people, to always continue to seek and try to fulfill whatever your highest purpose is, and to chase down whatever you're passionate and inspired by in life. I think we can all lift each other up with that message, and speaking about talks that you give, you mentioned the one coming up on the 20th in Alpharetta. What are you going to be talking about that day?
Since it's a writers club, I'll be talking basically primarily about the Good War book. It's got a lot of action in it. It's got action in the military, where you're being trained with live machine gun bullets and bombs and stuff. And the fact that there was one person that became not only injured but was afraid of snakes, and he stood up and he got cut in half. And so that particular book has a lot of dramatic, virtually true life things, crashing on a beach and in the Arctic and things of that nature. So I picked that one. The other reason is that I had met a few months ago an author in the same place, the Alpharetta Library, and she talked about her new award-winning novel, which was about a good portion of her life. And I was so impressed with the structure and so impressed with her presentation that we struck up a friendship, and she came over to the house after we had swapped books. I had one and she had hers, and they came over and spent some time, and now she's said she'd love to come to our get-together on there. So we purposely picked that book because she read it all the way through, and when she came over, she had a number of questions and comments she seemed enthused. So I picked that one. But I'm going to make it just snippets or small parts of it reduced and go on to some samples of the other books. And the one I mentioned earlier, Searching for the Good War, because it does relate directly with the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. And also I have a friend that will be in town, and he happened to be on the technical staff that gave the final overgoing for the Apollo 11. And so it will be a very interesting, I think, talk, and it won't just be talk, it'll be guests, and it will be a mixture of 2 or 3 books that we'll be discussing.
Right, sounds great. Excellent day coming up next Saturday.
Yes.
On the topic of events that you've spoken at, are there any highlights over the last few years of particular events that you enjoyed?
I would say the biggest one was, since I asked my wife a number of months ago if you had to say who is W.D. or Wayne Evans, what has he been all his life? And without batting an eye, she says, an inventor. I have 18 patents. And throughout my whole life, I've been creating things that I see a problem or I see something and I say it could be better. So one of the themes of one of my books was that it's never too late. And that's another little philosophical thing. And I joke to people to say that in my personal dictionary, I have torn out never and impossible. And so I just keep moving forward. But the biggest one was in the late 90s. I had worked for a couple of companies, and we were experimenting with civilian applications of GPS, which was before they really allowed GPS to any extent to be in the consumer market. Had an error in it of a football field. And Clinton went ahead, and he got a lot of people, the emergency services and things, that said you got to get rid of this built-in error that you put in to try to safeguard our enemies from using it. So there's a military version and a civilian version. So he did. So now it's to about 10 feet accuracy. And so when that was looming, I took my knowledge of all these years in wireless, and I put together a system that would improve the accuracy, and it would also start doing things that would make it suitable to put in a car. And and also that included speech. And so all the things you're familiar with now, I had created about the year 2000. And then thing that I wanted to bring up was about the Never Too Late. I tried to desperately get people interested in it, and by that time, we were trying to do something with it. I didn't have any money. I'd spent it, and I had kids in college and whatever. So it was a really downer. So about 10 years into it, I get a phone call, and it's from a young entrepreneurial legal firm, and they want to take on the challenge if they could get somebody to monetize it or get some money out of it for me. And so the sum total was about 13 years, and it finally clicked. And for 2 or 3 years, I was getting sizable checks from at least 85 car John Deere companies worldwide that was paying me for the rights of that. So out of my entire career, I would have to say that was probably the most dramatic because it was just one person, and it shows you what one person can contribute if it's the right place at the right time and they have the right ideas. So I'm not trying to toot my horn too much, but from a life of poverty, starting as a kid and having a dream, I have called my biography "The Man with More Lives Than a Cat," and the subtitle is "From Misery to Millionaire." And I became a millionaire, which in today's standards is not much. But when you don't have a pot to you-know-what in, winding up with getting 3 years of checks, which I in turn turned around and I helped my family, my son and my granddaughter, to buy some small businesses that they dreamt about, and paid off a lot of debts. So anyway, that was the biggest thing, was being known as, quote-unquote, the father of 21st century GPS.
That's fantastic, and a great testament about the tenacity of will, and like you're talking about, chasing your dreams and never giving up on them, to stick it out that long, 13 years, and finally see those things reach fruition down the line, never giving up on them. I know that you're...
A similar thing happened when I was in college, and I was becoming an artist. Purdue was an engineering school, but I was still doing something as an artist. And John Kennedy got killed, and when he got assassinated, I was in a lab with a friend of mine, and I was so angry. And so I went to the art class, and it was near the end of the class, and he says, "Why don't you just go out on the lawn there? It's a nice day, and paint however you feel." Well, I didn't feel too good, so I really have at it. And it was a pretty dark, dismal thing that I came up with. And so in any case, through a series of events, I never thought anything about it. And then later on, my daughter saw that there was a contest. We had moved out to Syracuse to work at GE by that time, and she said, "Can we enter some of your stuff?" And I said, "Sure." So we sat down on the floor, and she thumbed through my portfolio, and she, picked one, and she said, "I'll handle it all. Don't worry about it. I'll get it all framed, enter the contest." Well, guess what? I won. And it was 15 years. Never too late to make your dreams come true. And my painting hung in a New York art museum for a period of time.
That's great. Absolutely. I know that you're a self-made man, obviously, from an early age. But you talk about your teacher having given you that advice early on to go out and live your adventures. Are there any other mentors or role models, influences that you look back on that helped shape your life?
Well, it couldn't be my father because I never knew him. My stepfather, yeah, he was a self-made man because his dad, when his father passed away, he had a few shares of a small town bank stock, and my father worked in the post office. And over the years, when I was a teenager, he and my mother would go from Northwest Indiana to Chicago, and he'd take banking courses, and he leveraged that into a significant owner, and whenever he could, he would buy more stock, and he'd convinced him to put bank branches out in cow pastures. And they said, there's nobody there. He said, wait around 5 years. And he was way ahead of his time. But I had, in the Army, I had a couple of sergeants that took me into their wing. About the first day or two, I was at Fort Benning, and we were standing up there. I had just gone through a broken girlfriend thing. I knew I was being drafted at the time. I'd worked for a company doing Navy harbor defense. I was subjected to some accidentally death rate, and I had helped create something that would sink ships, and I didn't like that. So anyway, I had a big chip on my shoulder, and I got drafted, and it was, went into the Army, and the battalion commander comes by, and he looks at me, and he says, everybody's got their name tag on. He says, God, Evans, you have to be the worst soldier I have ever seen in this man's army. Well, anyway, thanks to a couple of sergeants that once again saw something in me that I didn't. In fact, I'm writing a book about that called The Invisible Me. The people that have seen things in you don't know. So they saw something in me, and they did what the jargon is, shaped me up, okay? And with all of that, I went on to take some secret technology. Of course, I had some technology. Became an instructor, and which was a blessing. And then that's where I got into trouble when I wanted to get married because I couldn't get a job. But anyway, that was the sergeants, and so and the fellow that when I was doing the Navy work told me one day, he says, I want to give you a promotion. I said, yeah. He said, but I can't. I said, why? He says, because you have nothing but a 2-year technical diploma, and you'd be working, and maybe even people would be reporting to you with masters and PhDs, government projects. So he says, I'm going to tell you what to do. He told me to run my number up, get drafted, get it over with, and if I didn't do that, he was going to fire me anyway. And the reason was he thought I was better than what my simple little 2-year education would be. So he was absolutely right. So he was someone that once again saw more than I saw in myself. So yes. And the last one is my high school music teacher. And I had difficulty learning to read how to music. I was trying to play the piano. And I discovered that I didn't need to read it because if I heard it a few times, I could sit down and play it from memory. So he did a little test, and he played chords, and 1 note, 2 note, 3 note, and he asked the class, what are these notes? And I didn't want to say much to begin with, but anyway, I finally said something. So he made the chords more complex, and then he swore that he had discovered somebody with perfect pitch. So anyway, he was inspiration to me because, again, he saw something that I didn't really realize, okay? So sorry, didn't mean to go on so long, but there's been a lot of people, and of course, my beloved wife of 58 years must have seen something in me that was worthwhile, or she would have never stuck with me.
No, that's all great. I appreciate that answer, and it's important in life to have those people that push you and propel you to meet expectations that maybe you don't even have for yourself in the beginning, but light that fire underneath you. And when you're talking about all the dreams that you've had and the imagination that has led you on all these journeys, what dreams do you still have left in you that you want to see fulfilled?
I would like to have enough opportunity to speak more often and try to instill that feeling that in people that they too have a lot more in them than they think, and it's just a question of just going for it, never too late type thing. I have, unfortunately, some limitations in the midst of putting an airplane together, I fell and I messed my back up. I couldn't walk for a year. When I finally had a walker, my pilot friends, I could drive, but they would help me get in my plane. I paid for it. I wanted to fly, so they helped me. And I had a brain concussion, and I have had 2 small strokes. And so I've gone through the whole route of not walking, wheelchairs, walkers, canes, which I now have, and I can't stand up more than about 10 minutes. So in any case, with those limitations, I'm not letting that keep me from going out, giving talks, and whatever. And I would enjoy having the opportunity to do that more. I could always say I would love to have somebody make movies out of some of my stories, but that's a long haul, and I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. I have a saying, and the saying is I have so many stories to tell, and I'm winding up with so little time left to tell them. I'm 84. But my great-great-grandfather, a Civil War veteran, lived to be 1 month shy of 100. And the story goes that he was swearing at the nurses and the doctors and even to God that he was not going to go because God told him that he was going to be the living to 100 if he got through the Civil War. So I guess genetically I'm going to be around for a while. But that's really what is. I enjoy people. I enjoy getting, but I can't really do a lot of networking or stuff because I can't stand for too long. So that's the sob party part of pity party part of my life.
Well, you're certainly living the example and are the epitome of what you talked about, eliminating those words never and impossible from your vocabulary. I like that advice a lot, and certainly persevered through everything. And here in the last couple of minutes, is there any final note you'd like to leave the listeners with? Maybe talk about where they can find your books?
If there's 2 different routes, well, 3, but anyway, they're on Amazon. But the best way to do it is if you go to my website, www.themanwithmorelivesthanacat.com, it'll show you all sorts of crazy things and a place that you can click on it, and it'll take you to my book page, and that gives previews of all of the books. And if you're courageous and you want to spend your vacation money, you can click on the buy, and we'll take you directly to the page on Amazon to purchase it.
Okay, good deal. Encourage everyone to go check out your website and check out your books. And I want to thank you for joining the program here tonight, Wayne. It's been a great opportunity to listen to these stories, amazing life that you've lived, and I want to wish you well coming up on the 20th, I think you said, next Saturday in Alpharetta. Hope that event goes great, and just next time you have another book out, you're always welcome back here on the show.
Well, we have a lot of them. It's a series, and they're all kind of different and unusual, and maybe we'll talk again sometime. You've been a good person. Thank you to be persistent, to both of us get together. I've enjoyed it, and I enjoy your other sessions and everything. So keep up the good work. We really need people like you.
Well, I appreciate those good words, and hope that you have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks again for coming on.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so once again, thank you to W.D. Evans for coming on. An exciting life he's lived, and encourage everyone to go check out his website, www.themanwholivedthanAcat.com, and encourage you to pick up his books as well. And hope that everyone out there has a great Sunday ahead. Gonna close out the show here with a piece of music from Vlada Mars, past guest on the episode, and this is from one of her albums of piano called Flight of Love.